Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another webinar from TUC Education. My name's Anna, and today we're going to be talking about staying safe at work. I'm joined by two fantastic guests at the moment, and we'll probably get a third shortly. We've got Arad Parsi from the Suzy Lamplugh Trust, and we've got Zarda Hussain from USDAW, and I'll be talking a little bit more about them in a second, but just a bit of background and housekeeping. We've got live captions, as always, on this webinar. Please click the green button underneath the video that says Open Live Transcript. You'll then be able to see the captions for this broadcast. We are recording, as ever, and we will send a link to the recording to anyone who's registered after we finish. We'll probably get it out by the end of today, if not first thing tomorrow. We'll also share any resources with you that we talk about or that you share in the chat panel. Great to see so many of you already saying hi in the chat panel, telling us where you're from. It's lovely to see. Please use the chat panel to exchange any tips or ideas about our subject. And finally, you can post a question for our speakers. At the bottom of the screen, there's a button that says Ask a Question. Post something there. We'll get to them after we've heard from Zarda and from Arad. If we don't get to them all, don't worry, we don't forget what you've asked us, but we use those questions to inform guidance that we put out to you so that you can do your role in the workplace. Right, so staying safe at work. We all know that there's different types of safety at work, and we often do traditional health and safety webinars in our series. This is a little bit different. It's more about personal safety and safety from third parties, maybe safety from customers, or safety from clients, safety from patients if you're in perhaps a healthcare setting. So we're going to be thinking about that type of staying safe at work today. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Arad Parsi from the Suzy Lamplugh Trust. He's going to be telling us about his work at the Trust and what campaigns they have got to help us all stay safe at work. So Arad, over to you. Do you want me to get the presentation up and running straight away? Or
yes, please. That'll be lovely.
Okay, I'll do that in the background.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this presentation. My name is Arad Parsi. I am Head of Business Development and Partnerships at the Trust. I will be shortly joined by my colleague, Walid Beres, who is the Lead Policy Officer at the Trust. And we're obviously here today to present to you and obviously answer any subsequent questions that you may have in relation to the importance of employee-employer collaborations in achieving practical and sustainable personal safety outcomes. And it's also important for me to mention at this stage that the Suzy Lamplugh Trust have really been around for coming up to 36 years now, and we've always took the stand to advocate for constructive collaborations between employees and employers rather than promote standoffs between them, because that collaboration is ultimately what's going to allow you to address and mitigate risks of aggressive and violent behaviors that you may come across in the workplace, and obviously that collaboration is ultimately what's going to get you home safe every day. If I could have the first slide, please. Okay, just very quickly, we obviously always make a reference to Suzy Lampro and who she was. 25-year-old state agent. On the 28th of July 1986, Suzy went to meet somebody called Domestic Kipper for a property viewing, and she never returned back to her workplace. She was missing for over 6.5 hours from the office, and it was only until at the very end of the day, when they came to close shop, that they realized that she was missing. She disappeared, and she's presumed murdered. It took 7 years for her to be declared deceased legally. She was declared deceased in 1993, but her case is still technically active. That's why the trust was set up by her late parents, to make sure that what she went through and what happened to her, it doesn't happen to other people. And that's why we're in the personal safety space as we are. If I could have the next slide, please. So I made a quick reference to it a little bit earlier on. The difference really between personal safety and health and safety is that health and safety is much more about your trips and falls and chemical hazards in the workplace. Personal safety is much more about the chances of you becoming exposed to or suffering acts of aggression, violence, or harassment in the workplace. And those behaviors are often perpetrated by the likes of clientele that you deal with, members of the public, general members of the public, who may or may not be known to you, or at times, in worst case scenarios, colleagues perhaps. But we define personal safety as an individual's ability to go about their everyday life free from the threat or fear of psychological, emotional, and physical harm. And if you actually look across to the stats on the right-hand side of that slide, you can see why personal safety in the workplace is so important. Where you do have the consequences of violence, for example, on employees, stress doubles, fatigue increases by about 50%, sleeping problems more than double, and then things like depression, more than 3 times the amount. So those are the sort of common things that we get to see post-incident, and that's why it's important. If I can have the next slide, please. This is certainly not a comprehensive list, but either through prolonged exposure to aggressive behaviors, or actually an experience of an actual, physical assault, if you will, people can be left to feel really quite fearful, shocked, angry. Those are the initial stages. But then as time goes by, they get to feel really quite agitated. They become emotionally numb. They suffer from poor concentration. They may withdraw from friends and family and socializing. They can suffer from lower self-esteem, and ultimately these lead to sort of mental health issues, things like mild depression to severe depression, anxiety, PTSD, and so forth. So again, this is not a comprehensive list, but it outlines why personal safety in the workplace is so key. Next slide, please. Sorry. So really today what we wanted to talk about is much more about the importance of collaborations between employees and employers. And I wanted to use the session to give you some empowerment, because we come across a lot of instances where either employees have been experiencing those aggressive and violent behaviors for a long time, or that there have been serious sort of incidents, serious assaults that have taken place. And often in speaking to people who have been exposed to those behaviors, we find that there are certain things that they weren't aware of. And in hindsight, that would have helped them in terms of making a decision at that given time. So one of the things that I want to concentrate on today very quickly is the sort of the legal entitlements that you have. Effectively, you in the workplace, your employer has a duty of care to you through policies and procedures, and that includes provision of training for you in case your job exposes you to those sorts of aggressive and violent behaviors, or things like risk assessment, which help you mitigate those in advance through adequate planning. You then have a responsibility to cooperate with your employer, and in relation to that, you have a duty of care to yourself, to your clients, colleagues, contractors, members of the public that you may come across in the context of your work. But what's really important for you to understand is that from a legal point of view, you are responsible for your personal safety, and your employer is responsible for your personal safety. And it comes at a cost to both. When personal safety, with good personal safety measures are not in place, you can suffer as an employee, but also your employers can suffer due to litigations, increased insurance costs, loss of staff, people being off sick. So there is a cost to the business, a cost to the organization as well. Again, that goes to empower you. The law does protect you, and it holds you responsible, but it holds them responsible. So it's really important to notice that. If I could have the next slide, please, Anna. So as you can see there, the top of that slide is what we just said in terms of the duty of care being applicable in terms of common law. But if you look at the left-hand side, there are obviously different laws in here, and I'm not going to go through each and one of them. But the most important three is common law that holds you responsible and holds your employer responsible. The Mother of All Health and Safety Acts 1974, that certainly has got lots of references to it in terms of the importance of your safety, and that reaches across to personal safety. And then number 3 is quite important, Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999. That particular regulation carries that your employer, if you are exposed to risks of aggression and violence in the context of your work, your employer has a duty of care and legally is responsible for acknowledging what those risks are, so working with you to identify what those risks are, and then obviously putting a plan in place with you in order to help you mitigate those risks as much as possible. So that's your empowerment. A lot of the people that we speak with who have been assaulted or who constantly are exposed to high levels of aggression often tend to tell us that they were not aware, and that's why they were not raising those concerns with the employer, with the line managers, with their HR and health and safety business partners. So please rest assured that the law does protect you, and hopefully that will give you a little bit of empowerment. If I could have the next slide, please. In terms of your organization's definition of aggression and violence, please note that every organization should have and will have a definition of what is and what is not acceptable. So it's really important for you and colleagues to read and apply those policies and those statements in the context of your everyday work. The important questions that I've recorded there on that slide is you need to know whether that policy will allow you to show zero tolerance to harassment, aggression, and violence or not. You need to know whether you have the right to say no when you are exposed to those behaviors. You need to know whether you're allowed to draw the line and say, I'm not dealing with it anymore. And you also need to know that and have the confidence to know that you will be supported if it came down to you deciding that I'm not going to deal with this because I don't feel safe. We hear in many instances people say, I didn't feel safe and I didn't want to deal with it, but I thought I was going to get into trouble with my employer or with my line manager. And actually the employer will say, well, no, because the personal safety policy tells them if it happens, pull out, don't do it. So there is that sort of disparity between the two. So it's really important that beyond knowing how the law protects you and empowers you in terms of your personal safety in the workplace, you also learn what the organization's definition of aggression and violence is, where you are entitled to draw the line, and what are you going to say yes and no to. And I'm going to give you a very quick example. If you look across Transport for London or the rail network, and if you look across the NHS, both of those organizations have a zero tolerance policy. But we often find that with the NHS is where rules are bent, because sometimes you have to put the safety of a patient perhaps first. So therefore, it's a zero tolerance and you may be being abused, but you still carry on doing what you do. So you need to make sure that you know the policy, you need to ask those questions, and you need to know that your policy is practical. And if your policy is not practical, if it's outdated, if it's not really comprehensive, please work with your employer and collaborate with them in terms of drawing up policies and procedures that do cover the breadth of what you do and do address the range of risks that you may be exposed to. Ultimately, it's about empowerment, and the personal safety policy, whether it's a standalone item or whether it's a part of the overall health and safety policy, should empower you to know when you can safeguard and when you can say no to certain behaviors and pull away from a situation. If I could have the next slide, please. Another thing that we tend to cover quite heavily with organizations is the importance of reporting. We all have very busy schedules. We're all bombarded with emails and meetings and various other things. And therefore, what we find is in many organizations where we start, at the beginning when we start working with them, we realize that reporting doesn't happen at the adequate level. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't report things where nothing serious happened, labeling those incidents as near misses. Well, it wasn't pleasant, but nothing actually happened. The problem with that is that in your case, in this instance, it was a near miss. It may be that the next time, whether it's you or a colleague dealing with the same person, may actually come across an actual incident. So reporting incidents is absolutely vital. Reporting near misses is absolutely vital. It allows you to, over time, begin to build an image. The trends begin to appear in terms of behaviors, whether it's to do with a particular individual or group of individuals, or general breadth of your clients and the members of the public that you deal with. Those patterns will then allow you to be realistic about your policy realistic about the risks that you face every day, how those risks change. Do they become more serious or less serious? So it's really important for you to be able to report. And you also need to know who to report to and how. My advice has always been, if you report something, whether there is a set procedure or not, make sure that stakeholders within your health and safety and your HR teams, your relevant business partners, know that these incidents are happening. Because if they don't know and they're blind to it, they may not be able to support you. If I could have the next slide, please. Personal alarms. This is something that the employers do often issue. Employees. We often find that these are issued, but unfortunately not very widely used. This again goes back to the policy. Policies tend to normally cover use of personal alarms. You need to be asking yourself, well, what's the primary function of the alarm? When should it be used? And once it is set off and used, what should you do next, or what should you expect to do next? And that's really, really important. We do come across a lot of people who tend to say, oh yes, I do have an alarm, it's in my bag somewhere, I don't think it's charged, or I think it's run out of battery. There are certain measures that an employer takes that you need to follow through. If they give you training, then that's collaborate with them, attend your training sessions and make sure that you stick to the takeaways and what you learn. If they issue you with personal alarms, then think to yourself, is this personal alarm really what I need? Is it going to do the job? If I raise the alarm, am I going to get the support? And again, if the answer to those questions are no, if it's yes, then brilliant, carry on using them. If it's a no, then that goes back to your policy and whether the use of personal alarm and how you choose what particular product you use is actually realistic in terms of the everyday tasks that you carry out. If I could have the next slide, please. And then just very quickly, there are also tracing systems which employers, apart from personal alarms and reporting systems, there are also tracing systems that employers tend to implement in the workplace. It's really important that these are not box-ticking exercises. So bodying systems, for example, if I'm out and about on a visit, if I'm going somewhere, my colleagues in the workplace know who I've gone to see, how to contact the person, what time I'm arriving, what time I'm leaving, and that allows me to make sure that I check in and out. It allows me to make sure that there are ways for me to covertly raise the alarm with my colleagues if something is amiss. But also it allows me to make sure, it comforts me to make sure that someone is looking out for me. Remember, Suzy was missing for over 6 hours without anybody realizing it. So bodying systems are very important. That should be a part of the policy and it should be a part of your procedures. It should be something that within your training, personal safety training sessions, if you do undertake those should be covered quite thoroughly. Lone worker devices, nowadays you have app-based, smartphone apps that do that. And then for those of you who may do jobs where you're in areas where there's no reception, there are the ones with geolocators. If you do get issued with these, can I please remind you, they are not to track you. We have a lot of people who unfortunately seem to think that these are tracking devices. They're not tracking devices. GDPR and general privacy policies will not allow your line manager to call a company and say, unless there is some very serious concerns about your safety. And unless they really are trying to find out where you are because you're missing from work, they will not be able to tell if you've gone down to Sainsbury's at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's not what these technologies are there for. But please use them, collaborate with your employer, and again, if those devices are not realistic, if they don't work where you're working, if you have an app-based device that doesn't work in rural farms, then you need to be able to raise that with the relevant people within HR, health and safety, and your line management, and make sure that your policy carries that the risk assessment they do covers the sort of systems you need in place, and those systems are functional because these devices do allow you to save time and save lives more important than anything else. And then obviously you have global positioning systems and two-way radios that also work, but the principle really around all of those is the same. So tracing systems are important. Following the earlier stuff that we talk about, knowing your policy, knowing your organization's definition of aggression and violence and what you're entitled to say yes and no to, following the reporting and how important that is in terms of establishing patterns for safeguarding, and all of that feeds into your policy, and all of that should really be based on who you are, what you do, what risks you're exposed to, and hopefully put that together, you will be able to begin to mitigate some of the things that can go wrong on daily basis in terms of in the context of your work. If I could have the next slide, please. So this is the last slide. Obviously, I will circulate this, and I can't remember if I've hyperlinked this as well, but I will circulate the slides so you could pass them on to the attendees, and we will hyperlink this so that you can go to our website, to the Suzy Lampro website, and read about Suzy's charter. Suzy's charter is really a charter that was put together in consultation with several unions, including USDAW and Unite and so forth. There was a year-long consultation with employers and employees, but also with the National Business Crime Centre of Scotland Yard, looking at crime across businesses and economic crime, if you will. The idea of those 8 points is, as you can see, it refers back to some of the stuff that I've said, is those 8 steps are what organizations can implement. The more often, the better, really, in order to make sure that you have a sustainable, working, practical set of protocols and policies in place to safeguard your workforce against harassment, aggression, and violence. Number one is embedding a workplace personal safety culture, which means that it has to come top to bottom. Everyone has to be in it. Risk assessment, number 2, and reporting is what we would cover in training. Number 4 is actually personal safety training. So for those staff who are at serious risk, you do need to have in-depth training in terms of how to go about your day and what systems to implement and how to safeguard yourself. Tracing systems I've already covered, that's on there as well. Having a system in place for you to covertly raise the alarm. This really is important for those of you who may work in people's homes, for example, who may go into people's offices, who may go to places where there is no mobile reception, for you to be able to contact and raise the alarm, not just normally, but covertly, because sometimes you may be in a situation where you're at high risk and you don't want the person who's there with you and who may be exposing you to aggression and violence to know that you're doing that. So that's really important to have those systems. Personal alarms I've covered, that really, really important in terms of many of these are linked to alarm receiving centres, where you are monitored on a live second by second basis. The conversations that you're having are being recorded, and that's all very important in terms of you knowing what happened and recording what happened, but also they can be used for prosecutions and so forth, and they can serve as evidence in case you come across a bad case of aggression and violence. And then last but not least, regularly consult and review your personal safety policies and procedures with the employer, and the employer has the duty to do that with the employees to make sure that what is in place is practical. Put all of that together with the right training and the right policies, hopefully you will be in a position where you've addressed the risks, and then you can begin to plan and mitigate on a daily basis, and hopefully get yourself to a place where through that planning and mitigation, you're safeguarding as much as possible. And of course, what your training program should tell you is how to manage situations in case all of that planning still leads nonetheless to something untoward. But you should still be in a much, much better place. The last slide to this is it's just the contact details of the trust, how you can contact us. We obviously are apart from the founding personal safety charity, the Suzy Lamplugh Trust is the UK's leading stalking authority. We do that because stalking and harassment are very much linked together, but also because evidence suggests that Suzy was stalked, and we still don't know, but there are some suggestions by police officers who investigated her case that what happened to her may have been on the actions of a stalker. But stalking is a personal safety issue. It can happen to you in the workplace. So if you come across it, then please go to our web pages. There is lots of advice, lots of free tools that you can use and so forth. And hopefully with that, you should be able to address stalking as well, which often HR departments are not, always up to date in terms of how to best handle those cases. I'm really sorry for the crash course. Lots of information available on our website. I will make sure that this is circulated and is hyperlinked, so it takes you to the relevant pages. And obviously, thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Arad, for that really great introduction to the Suzy Lamplugh Trust and the work you do. Just a couple of things, housekeeping things, really, I want to mention before we move on to our next speaker. So first of all, Arad's colleague, Violet, you did join us briefly. I'll get you back in a minute. Please don't think I've forgotten about you. I did see you there, and I'll get you back shortly. There's a couple of things that were posted in the chat that I just want to draw people's attentions to. One viewer recommended 3 books for workplace reps. all of which have information on today's subject about staying safe at work. So those books are Hazards at Work, The Law at Work, and Your Rights at Work. And they are all available from TUC Publications. We'll make sure that we include links to those in our follow-up email to this. Just to remind any latecomers, we are recording, so don't worry if you missed the beginning. We'll make sure that you get sent a link. And apologies to viewers for the delay with getting the live captions up and running. They are up and running now. We will make sure that a full transcript is sent out with the resources email, because it takes us a little bit of time to prepare that. That probably means it will go out tomorrow morning now rather than later today. So just to tip you off about that. So right, we now are going to hear from Zarda Hussain, who is a rep with USDAW. She is going to tell us about some of the great practical examples of what Arad has been talking about that she's been able to implement in her workplace. So things like policies, negotiations, and listening to colleagues and finding out their experiences of what actually happens. So Zarda, over to you to talk about your experiences as an USDAW rep.
Hiya, hello everyone. Good afternoon everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Zarda Hussain. I work in a supermarket. I'm a rep for the trade union USDAW. I have been a member for USDAW for over 20 years and a rep for the last 13 years. I want to talk to you this afternoon a little bit about USDAW's Freedom from Fear campaign work. Why we need Freedom for Fear campaign. Sadly, abuse and violence in the workplace has become the norm and not the exception for retail workers. Over the last 2 years, USDAW members have seen record levels of violence and abuse at work. The high figures seen in the first pandemic increased again last year. 90% of workers reported verbal abuse while at work, up to 88% in 2020, 64% reported threats of violence, up from 60% in 2020. And most disturbing of all, 12% reported actual physical assaults, up from 9% in 2020. Sadly, this isn't a new issue. USDAW has been campaigning for 2 decades to improve the safety of retail workers, specifically on the issue of workplace violence and abuse. Freedom from Fear campaign and how this started in 2003, and USDAW stands for the Union of Shop Distributive and Allied Workers, launched its Freedom from Fear campaign in response to members' concerns about increasing levels of violence and abuse. USDAW has worked with the public, retail employers, the police, and with the government to protect shop workers. For several years, it looked as if the problem was being contained. Figures from government surveys, reports from employers, and the union's own survey suggested that the problem was, at very least, not getting worse, and in some respects was being reduced. However, in the last couple of years before the coronavirus pandemic, there was disturbing evidence of a sharp upturn. The number of workers experiencing verbal abuse increased from just over half to more than 2/3 in that period. Number of physical attacks also rose sharply. Evidence suggests that a decline in police numbers, along with the cuts to public services such as youth sentence and drug rehabilitation schemes, were behind the increase in incidents. It was clear from our surveys and from figures provided by the retail employers that too many triggers for this violence and abuse were dealing with shoplifters and sales of age-restricted products. Between them, these accounted for more than half of the incidents. Although the situation is bleak and there are some early signs that the hard work we have put in with the retail employers, the police, and the government lobbying may be starting to make a difference. Protection of Workers Act Scotland. The passing of the Protection of Workers Retail and Age Restricted Goods Act by the Scottish Parliament was a very welcome development. The Act came into force in August, and by the end of December, almost 300 cases of abuse were under investigation by the Scottish Police. Police crime sentences in Courts Bills England and Wales. In Westminster, a statutory aggravating factor of assaulting a worker serving the public has been introduced and will come into effect in August. This is a significant step forward, however, is reliant on offences being brought to court for sentences. More work still needs to be done to improve reporting incidents to the police and to ensure that cases are actually pursued through the criminal justice system. There are a small number of successful pilots between some police forces and retailers in different parts of the country to encourage reporting and make it easier to report. USDAW will continue to work with the Home Office, police force and retailers to spread the good practice from the pilots to other areas. Where we go from here in our next campaign. Whilst we are proud of delivering changes in legislation to protect retail workers, a campaign is far from over. USDAW is committed to ensuring that abuse is not part of the job, and we will continue to work with retailers, politicians and police and the court system to deliver this. As we move from the pandemic, the union will continue to encourage all members to ensure they report in all instances of violence and abuse. Only through ensuring we are all aware of the issues retail workers face can we fully tackle the issue. In November, we will again be running our National Respect for Workers Shop Workers Week. This will run from 14th of November. The theme of the campaign will be Report It, Sort It. We are also looking at bringing together employers from across the sector to discuss what we have all learned from the pandemic and how we can quickly bring down the levels of abuse retail workers face. At the same time, we understand the need to ensure that the new legal provisions are effective. This means working with police forces so they are aware of the provisions and they utilize them. It also means working with the court system to ensure that offenders are sentencing appropriately. All I would like to say to our members is when you join a new employer, and I do get to deal with this quite a lot, learn about the policy and procedures. I know it's a lot more paperwork, it's a lot more involved, there's far too much to read and people just can't find themselves to sit down and read page for page, word for word. Personally, I'll print it off myself and I'll file them, I go through them, I highlight the important bits that I think that I don't have to search through the paperwork. As they're highlighted, I can quickly just point it out and say, well, you know what, this is where it says it. So to learn about the policy and procedures that are in place, learn of your workers' rights, refer to your T's and C's of your contract. If you feel that you have been told to do something that you believe is an unreasonable request, then say no, challenge it and back it up with a company policy and procedure, workers' rights, T's and C's, or even legislation, which you are protected by, but you have to go there and you have to find that information and you have to record that information. And once you have it to hand, you can challenge it, because 9 out of 10 times we're asked, well, where does it say that? Because we don't know, we've never seen it. But if you have it on paper and you highlight it and you show it, you can prove it. It does exist. Here, there it is. And a prime example that I do deal with in a lot of workplaces is, and the feedback that I have been given is, it's mainly the smaller stores that suffer, where staff is very little and the security guards do not start until later on in the time. And the shop might open at 6 a.m. and the security guards might not come on board until late afternoon. And the young workers themselves are left to carry on with their normal duties during the day and also mind the front door as well and mind the shoplifters too. And their lives are being put at risk. And it shouldn't be like that, because they are not trained. For you to be a security guard, you have to be specially trained in a way where you know how to deal with a shoplifter, you know how to restrain them, and you're specially trained. And when you look at their websites of the security, you see how highly trained the security guards are. And the shop floor staffs are not trained at all to do that role. and it's not within their contract to do that role. However, they are put at that risk, and they can say no. And thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zarda. That was fantastic to hear about the work you're doing in USDAW and in your store to help protect your colleagues. There's been some fantastic support in the chat panel to the work you're doing. That, you know, USDAW are really on the ball with a lot of this and have got a great campaign. We were actually also hoping to hear from Union Rep in Unite about their campaign, which is called Get Me Home Safely. But unfortunately, they had to, you know, that they couldn't come at the last minute. But we will share information about their campaign because I think it's really interesting and they're doing some fantastic work also on this issue. Okay, before I look at the questions that have been sent in, I'm just going to ask Zarda a question that was sent in advance. When I say sent in, I mean live. So a question that was sent in advance is, what are your top tips for workplace reps who want to campaign for better workplace safety protections from their employer? Can I just highlight one that you mentioned, you'll see the joke in a minute, that you said actually going through employers' policies and highlighting them, absolutely a brilliant tip, I think. Policies and procedures in the workplace can be like a massive folder full of papers, very dense, difficult to get through all of it. Get a highlighter and go through it and make sure you know the most important bits. I think that's one of the best tips we've ever had on a webinar. Zarda, what are your others?
What I would like to add to that is, from my personal experience, there are pages of it. It is so thick, and I mean, I'm a bookworm, no problem for me reading it. You do highlight them, but what you also got to be focused on is every time the policy and procedures change. And when they do change, you have to keep on top of that, and you have to keep on checking. When they do change, you've got then pull off another, you have to print off the policy and procedure all over again, the bit you are looking at, because it's in so many different sections from A to Z. You have to pull it off and then you have to update it again. It's just because the fact that it changes, and you have to really keep on top of that. So there are quite a lot of things involved which have been mentioned already regarding reporting the incidents, because if you don't report any incidents, obviously you won't be seen as a high risk store, and there a lot will happen and it will go unrecorded. There's a lot of material. There's a lot of material that you can order from online. You can call to even have that material delivered either to your home address or to work, which you can either set up a stall only for your worker facing campaign, or then your public facing campaign. And although organising stores, reps can ensure that the union is seen as a representative voice by employees when we are raising the issue, reps can also ensure that following incidents, members have given adequate time to be able to recover from the impact of abuse, threats and violence. We usually set up stores for public. Last year we ran stalls on high streets across the country to raise awareness of the offence in Scotland and campaign for the provisions in England and Wales. So it requires a lot more involvement, really, a lot more involvement from our members. I welcome from our reps as well to get a lot more involved. USDAW has also worked hard to ensure that relevant stakeholders are aware of the issues. We have organised events with MPs, police and crime commissioners, police forces to visit stores and hear directly from members and their experiences. And obviously this work will continue, USDAW will continue with this work to continue on.
Thanks, Zarda. That's really helpful advice. I'm going to put a couple of the questions to Arad just now. I think it's just you from Suzy Lamplugh, though, Arad. I think Violet's having some connection problems, so apologies for that. Right, so first question. You mentioned in your presentation about those personal safety alarms. Is there anything we can be looking out for, as in like a minimum kind of alarm? I mean, where can people get them from? What sort of features should, are important?
The quick answer to that is no. It's not one there is no one solution that fits all. If you look at the Suzy Lamplugh Trust website, we do have a number of partners who are in the sort of lone worker technology space. We don't endorse any of their products. We list them because of their credibility within the market, but also because they are, at the very least, BS 8484 approved. So we know that the technologies that they use have been sort of tried and tested. So you've got Vismo and Solar Protect and Stay Safe and various other People Safe, some of the biggest ones across the UK, and some of them actually are international. The reason that we don't endorse any one given product, and we don't recommend that you use at least the bare minimum should be this, is because the decision in terms of what devices to use and whether you use whether you use a geolocated device or whether you use a sort of an app-based technology, it really should come down to a thorough needs assessment of the risks that an employee is exposed to. So, for example, I know of an incident where a guy went onto a farm, a estate agent worker, because there was a standoff with the chap who was renting the farm. He hadn't been paying his debts. He had an alarm with him, and the guy had a shotgun. The farmer had come out with a shotgun. Now, at that stage, that alarm wasn't working because there was no reception. So standardizing something across the business is never going to work. In fact, many of the larger organizations that we work with tend to use 2 or 3 different technologies. If you go to the Suzy Lamplugh website and look at lone worker devices, there is a form that you can download, and it's a questionnaire. It's exactly the sort of questions that you want to be asking before you decide, what technology is best in terms of your employees. If you're a city worker, if you're working within, in places where you're always going to get, mobile signal, then obviously any of those app technologies will apply. If you go into blind spots and if you go into places where there might be fluctuations in signals, you really need a geolocated device. Sometimes within the same workplace, you need 2-way radios. So that can only be determined by a needs assessment of the type of risks, the type of environments that people work in, the type of activities they carry out, and the sort of people that they're exposed to. And then based on that, you make an informed decision. But a number of those providers are listed. We don't endorse any of their products per se for the reasons I've mentioned, but we are incredibly supportive of what they do. And we highly recommend that employers look at those technologies to see how they can be used to safeguard employees in terms of what they do in their regular everyday work.
Thanks so much, Arad, for that info. I would also add that, we at the TUC don't endorse any particular brand either. But I think what Arad was saying about picking what's best for your workplace is key here. You as workplace reps, you know what your members face in their everyday work. And while it's not your responsibility as a rep to provide the personal safety alarm, you can encourage your employer to include this in any policy so that it's reviewed regularly. You can influence the type of situations that are listed to make sure that every member and every colleague is protected adequately. Right, I'm going to just look at other questions that have come up. Right, we've had quite a few questions about lone workers, and both Zarda and Arad have touched on this in their presentations, that perhaps with an early opening store, there are people there by themselves. Arad, the estate agent you talked about, that is kind of lone in a way, and you're the only employee there. But the example that we've been that someone has raised is private security guards who often do night shifts and are reliant on only hourly check-in calls. Do we think this is adequate, and what measures can we try and implement to increase protection for these lone workers who are alone at night, which I guess makes them even more alone? Arad, let's go to you first.
Sure. If I may just mention about the word lone worker. There is a misconception that people think a lone worker is somebody who works alone. You could be entertaining a whole bunch of people in a restaurant. It could be a lone worker. You could be sitting in an office with security guards and security personnel within the building and people in adjacent offices, but you're a lone worker. So by the health and safety executive definition, a lone worker is someone who's not closely or directly supervised by their employer whilst at work. In terms of the security guards, I do agree with that. So often within the security industry, you've got this issue of sort of lone security guards who tend to cover night shifts. And what they do is they tend to check in and out once every hour. And there is a window of 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever that they give them so that they check in and out within that time. So if you imagine if you checked in and said everything is fine and soon after that something happened, it could be up to an hour before anybody started to realize that you're not responding. And obviously that's quite a risk. So there are obviously various other solutions, but the lone worker devices in a way could be a solution to that. Either that, or if you've got, sometimes within the same establishment, in the same buildings, you have security guards who work in different parts of, an arena, for example, or a large establishment, a large building, but they're lone workers on their own. They could have communication channels through WhatsApp groups and so forth to check in and out more frequently with each other. But in terms of checking in and out with their alarm receiving center, it tends to be once every hour. And of course, that is good, but it could put you at risk of you not being able to let someone know if something's happened and you're unable to check in and out. One of the technologies, for example, that helps is that Geo-Located Devices that you can get on lone worker technologies if you are at a certain angle. So if you're lying down on the floor, for example, or if you're reclining over 30 degrees on your chair, for example, after about 30 seconds or 45 seconds or something like that, that automatically raises the alarm with the alarm receiving center. So sometimes lone working is not just about coming across aggression and violence. Sometimes it's about you being diabetic and having an attack. It could be something like that, but it could then subsequently put you in harm's way because you're no longer able to fend for yourself, and then you may come across untoward behaviors. So those lone worker technologies will allow you to, at least if something is about to happen and you're on shift and you're a lone worker, at the push of a button, send a red alert to an alarm receiving center. And then you're being listened to. And what they will do is they will communicate with your folk, with your people, that something is amiss. We've just had a red alert. And then that way, no one waits for a whole hour before they get back to you. So it really is, again, dependent on who's around you, how far away are they. Can you have some sort of shorter communication sort of a setup with other people nearby you, or whether you need to have a device on you that allows you to raise the alarm covertly, or that it raises the alarm for you in case you're incapacitated.
Thanks, Arad. That's helpful. Zarda, can you just talk a little bit more about the lone worker policy that you, or the lone workers experience that you mentioned in your store, and what our store have done to help protect them, please?
That is one case scenario we're still working on very hard, because our union is made of our workers, of our members. And there is no union if there are no members. And when you look at these smaller stores and you look at one female worker who has to go and open up this small store first thing in the morning at 6 a.m. and there are people that are lying right outside the door that are probably high on drink and drugs and refuse to move out the way. They're sleeping, and the individual, the female worker, will have to try and, you know, unfortunately, quite fearful, not wanting to go to work first and foremost, thinking what they're going to find at the front of the store this time, and having to try and nudge them and ask them politely, you know, can you please move out the way because I need to open up. That's something that I have actually mentioned, and I have actually spoke about at the ADM for a proposition to be very strongly supported that we can work with, because the only issue we have is that even though it has raised, there are still a lot of work that has to be done within that store to raise it as a high risk issue. So everything has to be reported. If it's not reported, it goes unseen because no one's mentioned it. They feel as if everything is okay and it's running smoothly. However, people, you know, certain people are living in fear, thinking, you know, I can't do this by myself. And so, I mean, we have to just make sure, and we do have the safety mechanisms that are in place. So a range of technology available, high risk stores have definition CCTV and body cams if desired to wear by staff, emergency panic buttons available at places where necessary. Other than that, we're still working on that.
Well, that's great to hear, Zarda. And I think what reps can perhaps do, to reference something you said just there, is in your regular activity, when you're mapping the workplace, talking to your members, ask them how they feel about personal safety. Start to include it in your regular conversations with members so that they feel able to come forward to you, and that you can then, as a rep, raise it with management so that it's something that's on the agenda and can be dealt with. Right, I'm just going to see what other questions we've got. We've probably got time for a couple more. Okay, we've all noticed in the past 2 years the increase in screened off areas, be that at receptions, you know, in office buildings, or screened off areas in shops. Those screens probably brought in for COVID reasons initially. However, we are starting to see some of these screens reducing to a half level, and that perhaps workers feel less safe with these half level screens because they're easier for people to jump over. People are feeling much less safe with these. However, employers are not willing to move back to a full 100% screen. So do you have any advice? We'll go to you first, Arad, of what reps can do in that situation to convince the employer that this decision is leaving staff exposed to, well, putting their personal safety at risk?
Well, I think first and foremost, it goes back to the importance of reporting, isn't it? Because if you've got, I've certainly worked with businesses and with various other sort of offices where people have not only jumped over barriers, but I know of, you know, people leaning over. I've certainly come across cases of people leaning over the reception desk, picking up the phone and chucking it at the receptionist. In one case, somebody picked up a monitor, a computer monitor, and chucked it at the receptionist. Lucky enough, because he was wired up and he was plugged in, the wire was too short. Otherwise, he could have very seriously hit her. I think that goes back to the importance of reporting, because reporting is not just about reporting what happened, but it's also about looking over a period of time at the type of incidents. And if you do have a workplace whereby people are likely to get, you know, quite sort of fed up and quite agitated, and do that sort of a thing, and you know, perpetrate that sort of a behavior, then obviously that helps immensely. But I think ultimately what it goes back to is, you know, where we stand in terms of, you know, the employer and the employee collaborating. There shouldn't be, the employers should certainly not be hard-nosed about something like that. If there is a screen which is 30 centimeters, what needs to be 60 centimeters, I think most clients and most people will understand that. I myself wouldn't have questioned that to say, why is your screen 30 centimeters and not 60 or vice versa? So I think sometimes we concentrate so much on the element of customer service that we almost begin to lose the rights of the employees. And I think employees need to work together and work with the employer to try to reiterate the concerns, and trying to reason why. If the data is not available, then what you need to do is you need to highlight the risk, because if those risks are communicated to someone who's a HR business partner, for example, they simply cannot be ignored. The employer needs to take a stand and do something. And if they don't, and something untoward happens, then they are technically legally responsible for it. But it's about not having a standoff, having a collaborative and constructive conversation with each other, and saying, let's not remove that, because what it has done, it has stopped such and such incidents in the past from reoccurring again. And I think we also need to be, employers also need to address the fact and accept the fact that violence and aggression come from emotions such as frustration, bad customer experience in the past, from fear, from frustration, and so forth. And this is one of the reasons that throughout COVID, we've seen such a hike in those behaviors, because people are more likely to have been experiencing humiliation and fear and anxiety and frustration. It doesn't justify what people do in terms of, unleashing aggression and violence on employees, not at all. We're very much against that. But I think employees need to understand that not everybody, every client who comes in is perfect in their mannerism. So there has to be a realistic point of view to sort of choose in between. So my suggestion would be to go back to your reports, go back to the evidence that you have, and if it's not there, reiterate the risks and reiterate that you simply don't feel safe. And if you do that in the right way, not just through your line managers, but through the HR and health and safety business partners of the business, and those who are responsible directly for that sort of scenario, then you should hopefully be able to convince them to do what it is that you need to feel safe in the workplace.
Thanks, Arad. There's some useful tips there. We all know that as workplace union reps, that sometimes these things take time. So I think it is, just to reiterate what Arad says, use your evidence, report it, keep bringing it up with management, and get your members to keep telling you about how they're feeling. Make sure you present that to management to keep the conversation going. We've also had posted in the chat, just a bit further up, I'm just trying to find it. Post this information to your site health and safety rep to undertake a full risk assessment, to include it in that. I think that's some excellent advice too. I'm just seeing if we've got time for one more question, because we've sped through almost an hour. Okay, one more question here. So this is a bit of a legally one. So if we can't answer it now, we will look up an answer for you all. If the employer leases offices or premises, where does the duty of care cross over between the landlord and the employer in terms of personal safety? Is there something that reps need to be aware of in these situations if it's a lease? Who wants? Arad, can I go to you first with that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, if you're leasing offices, technically, again, I'm not a legal professional, so I would certainly say seek legal advice, because there may be something that I'm missing. But if you are leasing an office and the setup of the office is somehow exposing you to additional personal safety risks, I would have thought that that's something that falls to the employer, because the landlord would not necessarily be familiar with who you are and what you do with the intricate details. They may know what organization you work for and broadly speaking what you do, but the landlord wouldn't necessarily appreciate what risks your employees may be exposed to. That's certainly something that the employer should be much more conscious of. But obviously seek legal advice, but I would have thought that any risk assessment should be done by the employer upon you as an employee or group of employees raising a concern to say that, you know, there are these risks, or there is this particular risk in place, which the 1999 regulation, health and safety in the workplace regulation, will dictate that, you know, you need to address that. You need to see what that risk is, put a plan around it, and then just, you know, sort of implement the necessary measures to be able to protect your workforce. I don't think that's something that would fall to the landlord, and obviously the landlord would say, you saw it and you took the office, or you took the premises as it was. So you know, that's what runs through my head. But please do seek legal advice. Don't take mine. I'm certainly not a solicitor.
Thanks, Arad. And yeah, we always reiterate that if you're unsure about something regarding the law, best to check with an expert. We are having people in the chat panel say it's the employer's responsibility, not the landlord's. But yes, we double check that. If you're ever unsure, double check. Okay, we've been going for very nearly an hour. I'm just going to let Zarda have a couple of last words. If there's anything you want to add for our audience about your experiences of making the workplace safer for your members, we'd love to hear them.
I think a lot has been
Sure, absolutely. We've covered a lot.
Already.
We've covered a lot.
Yeah, it has been covered already. All I would say is for our members and our reps to work very closely and drop down any issues that they have. We have monthly meetings. You know, we usually ask the store manager to join us in this meeting. Whatever concerns and issues we have, we do raise it right at that point in time, and we also do ask, well, when will we see a change, or when will we see this be implicated? So you know, with a time scale, hoping to see that change. Oh, there is a lot, but there is a lot, but my mind is blank.
No problem at all, Zarda. Thank you so much for telling us about your experiences as an USDAW rep and as a worker in retail. Arad, thank you for telling us about the work of the Suzy Lamplugh organisation. I'm sure there are many of us who remember the awful case and what happened to her. It's fantastic to hear that you're doing work to try and prevent this happening to anyone ever again. We will share all of the links and resources that you have told us about. I'm sure there's lots on the Suzy Lamplugh Trust website that people can learn from. Thank you to the audience. You've been fantastic. We will see you again in a few weeks for another webinar. Do look out for the email. It will be tomorrow now with the recording and of the transcript and all the resources. We'll see you again soon, and bye-bye for now.
Thank you.